My name is Will St. Ledger. I'm an artist and activist. I've been doing art and activism pretty much since I was 16. So this talk that I'm giving this morning is some kind of history that goes, beyond me, but is something that's an integral part of what I do. When we talked about survival, I thought to myself, there's lots of different ways of interpreting survival, but I wanted to do it in a way that was relevant to me, and also maybe help you understand some of the things that that frame my aesthetics, but also my activism as well. So the talk I'm going to give this morning is framed really through a symbol, and that is a pink triangle. A pink triangle used really in design as a warning symbol or as an aesthetic symbol, often used as a caution symbol. But in 1930s Germany, as the Nazis rose to power, they shut down institutions like the sexual institution run by Magnus Hirschfeld. They imprisoned homosexuals and lesbians and activists, anyone who stood up against them. What they did is they sent thousands of people into jails and also to concentration camps as well. And from about 1934 onwards, gay men were routinely rounded up and sent to jail. Now, the numbers are about 100,000, of which about 50,000 of those served regular prisons terms. But some of those, about 5,000 to 15,000, were sent to concentration camps across Germany, from Dachau to one that's just about 30 miles outside Berlin called Sachsenhausen, which I visited a couple of years ago. It's a very, very grim place. And why is the pink triangle important? Is because inside those camps, they use an elaborate system of identifying the prisoners in those camps. And they were triangles of different colors. We'll say if you were a political prisoner, it was a red triangle. If you were a Jehovah's Witness, you would be given a purple triangle. But the one was given to gay men was the pink triangle. And the pink triangle was one of the worst badges you could have in a concentration camp, because not only did it mean that you got extra punishment and you were targeted more by the SS officers, but also as well it identified you to other people in the camps as being a homosexual man, and the sympathy from the other people in the camps as well was as less as well, because homosexuality, at that time, you were seen as the lowest of the low. There was one badge that was even worse in the concentration camps at that time, and that was a combination badge, which is the intersection of the pink triangle and the gold triangle that formed a gold star pink triangle of the Star of David. This was to signal gay Jewish men, and very few of these people survived the camps. Of the people who survived, you don't see many of those histories there of those people who survived in the camps. So that's what was happening in Germany around that time. Now, after the war had ended in 1945 and the camp liberation had happened, what had happened was that even though all the other political prisoners, some of the other political prisoners were in prison too, Germany as a country used some of the lists and some of the crimes, so-called crimes that are being homosexual, under paragraph 175, which is a very old law in Germany, to rearrest and re-imprison gay men after the war. So they suffered the double blow of surviving the concentration camps with that badge of shame, and then being rearrested afterwards and imprisoned then. And really that was a real dark history of Germany post-war as well. So it wasn't really till decriminalization started to happen, decriminalization of homosexuality started to happen across Europe post-war, that we really started to see the emergence of a new gay liberation movement. In the UK, for instance, it was 1967. In Germany, it was 69, although East-West Germany had separations, so it wasn't really till 1972 that was across Germany. And other things were happening as well. I mean, in the US, from about I think it was 74, somebody's going to correct me on this, that the American Psychological Association had declassified homosexuality as a mental disorder, and that was followed on then by the American Psychological Association in 1975. Other things started to happen as well, and even though I'm going to focus a little bit on the US, on Ireland and Germany, over in the States, the Stonewall Riots happened, and that was a riot that took place in June of 1969, where a group of trans women of color, gays, lesbians, who were frequenting a bar called the Stonewall Inn in Christopher Street in Greenwich Village, were routinely harassed and beaten by the police for who they are. And on one night, they decided enough was enough, and they rioted, and for about 3 days they rioted with the police, and that was the beginning of the sort of pride movement, or the beginning of, we'll say, the gay liberation movement in the United States. It was about 1972 that the first account of the eyewitness reports of what had happened in the counts happened, and it was a book that was being written in the late 1960s. This book by Helman Herger was an account of 15 men who had been in the camps from Dachau and Sachsenhausen. Some of the men who were in this book and who gave their accounts in this book didn't even identify themselves because of the shame that they still carried with them afterwards. And it was at this time that some academics were saying that this book itself, The Men with Pink Triangles, was the emergence of, or the rejuvenation of, the pink triangle as a symbol of gay liberation rather than as a badge of shame. And as that continued then, over in Ireland here, you had the setup of the campaign for homosexual law reform. Lots of people involved, some notable Senator David Norris, Mary McAleese, and Mary Robinson, who would be part of the council that took the Irish government to court here in Ireland and then later on into Europe to rescind the draconian laws that had been put in place by British Empire, really, against homosexual men in Ireland. At the same time, the National Gay Federation was also setting up here too, and they had a centre that they leased out in Temple Bar. And Temple Bar is underdeveloped at that time, but they created a centre there called the Hirschfeld Centre. And that centre took its name from Magnus Hirschfeld, whose institute and archive in Germany were burnt down in the 30s. So there's a history there right from Germany all the way to Ireland. At that time in the 70s, Temple Bar was underdeveloped, and the building that they leased out had no identifying mark that it was the Hirschfeld Centre. It only had a pink triangle hanging outside its door. So you see, the pink triangle had a huge importance to people as an identifying symbol of as a place where they could be themselves. And one of the interesting things about the Hirschfeld Center as well is that there was no outside funding, of course, because at that time homosexuality was illegal in Ireland or criminalized in Ireland. So they ran club nights on the second floor, a night called Flickers, and they raised money from those club nights to pay for the rent, fund publications, a telephone line, a cinema, and lots of other outlets for gay and lesbian people in Ireland at that time. The pink triangle was used quite a lot in gay publications around the 80s and around in the 70s and 80s around Europe. And one of there's lots of instances in Ireland where it's been used. Tony Walsh, who's here from the Irish Queer Archive, has shown me a whole history of letterheads and pamphlets where variations of the pink triangle were being used. This is one that I particularly like, because this is Gay Pride Week in Dublin in 1980, and this was the second, I believe, Gay Pride Week. There had been some gay prides before. They had been a collection of people who got together, maybe 12 or under 50 people who got together in the late 70s to call for reform, but this was one that really extended the sort of celebration of same-sex love in Dublin and in Ireland at the time. And I've always been a huge fan of the pink triangle, because for me it represents the change from a badge of shame into a liberation symbol. You have to remember as well, 1980, this was 2 years after, we'll say, the rainbow flag had been designed by Gilbert Baker in San Francisco. And the rainbow flag hadn't really been seen much outside of San Francisco, because it was only just a flag at that time. It wasn't really a symbol in the same way it is today. But the pink triangle had a much more important part. I didn't bring my notes, and I didn't want to speak from notes, and that's why I'm sort of like going on the fly here. So I guess towards the start of the 80s, you started seeing the decriminalization across Europe, not yet in Ireland, but across Europe, or the fight for gay liberation. But the gay liberation was, to me, another foe. That wasn't religious doctrine or political ideology, but was a biological enemy, and that was the retrovirus, that is HIV. In 1981, the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, reported a cluster of pneumonia in otherwise healthy gay men in San Francisco and California. Those numbers grew and grew, and in the early days it was called GRID, gay-related immune deficiency. And so we started to enter into the age of AIDS. About 1982, in fact, January 1982, a Jewish playwright, a man by the name of Larry Kramer, assembled 80 of his friends and colleagues in his apartment in New York in response to an emerging AIDS crisis, because at that time the discrimination against people who had AIDS was incredible. They were being refused treatment in hospitals and turned away. Even when they did get into hospitals, their food was being left outside the door. Technicians and people refused to go in their rooms. They were treated with suspicion, and even in death, the undertakers refused to take their bodies. So they set up a gay men's health crisis, and that organization helped gay men and their families to organize legal funds, a buddy system, a caring system, really. It was a direct response to the age of AIDS. Around that time as well, in 1982, in fact, July of 82, a 37-year-old man died in London. His name is Terence Higgins. And later on, he would be one of the first people in the UK to die of AIDS. Later on, a trust would be set up in his name and still continues today. About that same time, a young man from Glasgow called Jimmy Somerville would travel from Scotland, where it was still a criminal to be homosexual, to England, where decriminalization had happened. He lived in Brixton with two other men, Larry Steinbach, and I'm going to forget the other person's name, which is criminal of me. And they set up a group called Bronski Bee. And it's always remarkable to me that in 1983, that they, after only 9 gigs, that they had put together an album which talked about the loneliness of being gay. In the song "Small Town Boy," that it talked about gay liberation, and that album went to number 3 in 1983 by 3 openly gay men in Thatcher's Britain, and I think it's incredible. It'd be one of the things that would have influenced me when I was about 12, 13 at the time. So it would have been a huge influence on me, particularly when I saw the pink triangle on the inside art cover. The other thing to note as well about Jimmy Somerville's situation, the reason it's called age consent, is that even though as a 19-year-old living in London, he would have been free to enjoy his newfound liberation, the age of consent for homosexuals in the UK was 21. It was 16 for heterosexuals. Over here in Ireland, in response to the AIDS crisis, activists set up the Gay Health Action Group, and it did the similar things as the New York group did as well, and give out information about HIV and AIDS. But the thing is, what restricted their work was not only was homosexuality in Ireland criminalized at that time, but it took until 1985 for somebody over the age of 18 to go to a pharmacy to be able to buy condoms. The one thing that would help you survive from 1979 until that time could only be bought in a pharmacy if you had a prescription from a medical doctor. This is quite a startling statement that I found the other day, and it's quite startling because this isn't just some mad preacher or conservative. This man, William Buckley, was the founder of the National Review magazine in 1955, and a very, very close friend and ally, confidant to Ronald Reagan. And with this kind of thinking that went on at the time, it's no wonder that Reagan was silent about AIDS until an address to Congress in 1985. And maybe it's this kind of language that is used around HIV and around AIDS at that time that it had an impression on Arvin Finkelstein, who's an artist from New York, set up a collective in 1986. He had lost his lover to AIDS about a year before and was trying to make sense of it. Brought together 6 of his friends, artist colleagues and friends, and over the space of 9 months looked at ways of how they could visualize living in the age of AIDS. They settled in 1986 on producing a poster which was pasted around New York, about 3,000 of them, Silence Equals Death, which was using the vernacular of of advertising in its typography, but also using the symbolism of the pink triangle as well. Now, that could have very easily have faded away, and it could have been something that you probably see in an archive today. But around exactly that same time, Larry Kramer, who I talked about earlier, who had run the Gay Men's Health Crisis, in his frustration had brought together a group of people and said, we are going to set up a direct action organization. And that was founded in March of 1987, 30 years ago this year. 30 years ago this year. ACT UP is a diverse and nonpartisan group of individuals who are united in anger, who demonstrate and fight to end HIV and AIDS. So the symbolism that Arvin had used in his poster, Silence Equals Death, informed so much so of what ACT UP was to do. And in a way, the pink triangle became iconic. Also as well, through my research, and Tony will probably help me with this later, but up until that time, the pink triangle had been in its inverted position. And this is one of the most popular versions of where you see the triangle now turned up in this way. Just a quick overview of the 80s in general. I kind of, when I was thinking back, I was thinking growing up in the 80s, going from being a preteen into my sort of late teenage years and into college, it seemed like every other symbol that was out there had to do with survival. In 1982, we'll say the CND badge, was, I mean, I was terrified. I used to go to bed terrified that there would be a thermonuclear war, and that all my friends would die and my family would die. It was a real fear, and also it was a little bit selfish as well, because I also thought I was going to die a virgin, and there was this guy in my class called Bill Burke who I really, really fancied. He had like beautiful dark hair and Roman lips. Oh, and if you're watching this, Bill, sorry, you lost out. Anyway, in Ireland as well, you had laws that were being passed. You had the constitutional laws being passed limiting reproductive rights of women. In 1985, you had the French government sending French agents to Auckland and New Zealand to plant bombs on the Greenpeace ship Rainbow Warrior and blow it up and kill a Greenpeace photographer, Fernando Pereira. You had Live Aid that was there as well, again about survival as well, people dying in their millions in Africa. And one of the things that really stands out for me in that performance and watching a Live Aid in July of 1985 on TV was Freddie Mercury's performance. It was so incredible, and I think we all remember how great Queen were. But by the time it got around to the emergence of the red ribbon in about 1991, where it kind of rose to prominence during the Tony Awards, Freddie Mercury had already died of an AIDS-related illness. So in sort of like bringing it forward now a little bit, right up to 2010, I talked earlier about the Hirschfeld Center, and they'd run clubs to fund the center. In Ireland in '88, Tony Walsh and Catherine Glennon had co-founded a magazine called Gay Community News. There had been magazines before. One of them, a magazine called Out, had actually used the pink triangle, but this one has been around since 1988. And in 2010, as a recession and the effects of the recession really kicked in, as advertisers started to tighten their budgets, GCN was looking like it needed more money to keep going, and it is the longest running gay magazine in Ireland. So they decided, and we got a group of us together, including myself, to decide we were going to do something to help GCN, and that was to create a club. And the club that we created was a club called Mother. And when I designed the logo for Mother, every single thing that I'd been informed by, ACT UP, Bronski bees, the typography, the symbolism had all sort of ingrained itself in me, so much so that I knew exactly what I wanted to do when I put the logo together. And even down to using Helvetica in a squished way so it looked like a family of people who were all different from each other all together, because that's kind of what Mother was like. It's this small club. It holds about 200 people, and everyone gets squashed in together, and we all get sweaty. It's good. You should come along. So Mother was about survival of a magazine, GCN, and of course it evolved as well. So we're going to bring it right up now to sort of current times in 2015, and the significance as well of where the pink triangle falls into it. Over the last 10 years, I've been working on the campaign to bring about marriage equality in Ireland, and some of our early exploits were with myself and Lisa Connell had set up a direct action group called Equals, and we'd chained ourselves to the Dáil and done all sorts of direct action for it. But as it came towards 2015 and the referendum was on, you really saw an explosion of sort of colour and campaigning and people getting it together. One of the symbols that I loved at the time was a symbol designed by designer and a great friend and of mine, Niall Sweeney. I thought, again, spoke more about the lineage of the pink triangle, and maybe of the typography of ACT UP and silence equals death. And that was this one here, no more, no less. So does silence equals death anymore? I mean, from 1986 until where we are now? Yeah, it does. In Chechnya, there are detention camps for gay men right now, where men are being tortured and imprisoned and killed for being gay. In Indonesia last month, 12 gay men were caught together in a hotel. They were publicly flogged. They were given forced HIV tests. Their names were published in the paper, and so were the results of their HIV tests as well. Silence still equals death. Even if it isn't a physical death, it can be a personal and social death. But I'm going to leave you with some good news. And that is, science also equals health. There has never been a better time for ending HIV and tackling the HIV crisis in Ireland, because we have one here. The reason being is that science has given us so many tools. You can take a drug today, it's called PrEP, that if you're at risk of getting HIV, will stop you from getting HIV. Absolutely safe and effective drug. Hundreds of thousands of gay men around the world are taking it. Not just gay men. Anyone can take it. Anyone with significant risk of acquiring HIV can take this drug. You will not get HIV. We don't have it here. It's inaccessible to us. Even better news is that it has been known since about 2008, but it's only in the last 2 years it's become a thing, and the Terence Higgins Trust released their campaign on it yesterday. People living with HIV on effective treatment, that means people who are taking their HIV medication every day, the virus levels in their body become so low that they cannot pass on HIV. That's incredible. That's a game changer in terms of ending HIV. People with an undetectable viral load do not pass on HIV during sex, and that's important. I'm going to end with this, because being the political animal that I am, this is Silent Harris, who's that direction. He's not actually, he's more sort of like up that direction because he's going to Berlin today. Silent Harris has said nothing about HIV. Nothing. World AIDS Day last year, ACT UP was outside that building protesting, setting the alarm up for the HIV crisis in Ireland. There is a HIV crisis in Ireland. Every 18 hours, somebody in Ireland gets a HIV diagnosis. In 2006, when I first came back to Ireland, 60 people, 60 gay men were diagnosed with HIV. Last year, it was 289. Overall, the figures are just the tip of the iceberg. And that can be changed. And the reason it's not happening is there's a lack of services, there's a lack of data, there's a lack of political will to tackle the HIV crisis in Ireland. And that's one of the reasons why I'm with ACT UP. I'd like you to take a photo of this and share this on social media and type in the hashtags. And I'd like Simon to see it. Maybe he sees it, maybe he doesn't. But until then, this is the reason I'm an artist and I'm an activist. ACT UP. We demonstrate, we educate, and we won't be silent. Thank you very much.